And our presenter tonight is the Reverend Carol McKinley, who is a community minister affiliated with with our congregation in Olympia, Washington. And I've known Carol for several years, and she is also a member of the Pacific Northwest District Healthy Congregations team, and it is wonderful to have her with us tonight. Carol, welcome, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, James. We ready to go?
We're ready to go.
All right. So, as our title shows, we are untangling the triangles. And this is a webinar presented by the Pacific Western region this evening. I'm going to use an opening reading by Daniel Day Williams. He writes, "Love does not resolve every conflict. It accepts conflict as the arena in which the work of love is to be done." This evening, we're going to be addressing the dangers of triangulation. That will be our work of love for this evening. And as we go along, I'll be asking some questions and to get your ideas as well as we move through this hour. We will end at 8 o'clock. So our first image is of a triangle. Now, some triangles are helpful. In fact, some are very necessary. A ladder, for example, forms a triangle in which 2 points help to stabilize a third.
Carol, let me interrupt for just a moment. I don't think you started sharing your screen yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Slideshow. I need to go back here. Okay. Share screen. Oh, I'm sorry on that. All right. Okay. So we're going to pick up right here. The previous slides were the title and background on just me. But as I was saying about triangles, they don't work out well in human relationships despite the way they work in a ladder. In fact, triangles can create some problems, especially when we find ourselves in triangulated conversations. This evening, we're going to look at 4 questions. What are triangulated
Carol, can I suggest that you resume your slideshow, and that way you'll have a presenter view, and we'll be able to see your slides better.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. That's better. Okay, I'm going to start moving through these. So, what are triangulated conversations? The second question we're going to look at is, why do we get caught up in them? The third question, how can we recognize them? And what options should we consider when we find ourselves in that situation? We'll conclude with the question, is triangulation always unhealthy? And I'll offer some lighthearted ways to use triangulated conversations to enhance goodwill in your congregation. Now, I'm assuming that each of us gathered here knows and agrees on what triangulation is. Let's have a couple of ideas from you about what triangulation is. So if you will maybe raise your hand, or James can unmute you and we might get some ideas.
I'm going to call on folks. Lydia, could you share with the group a time that you've recently experienced triangulation?
Yeah, I have a great one. Do you know this, James, from talking to your staff?
I'm presuming no inside knowledge here.
Okay, well, hold on a minute. I'm going to close my door.
Lydia, we are recording this for future use, so I encourage you to use discretion.
I'm back on. No, I'll use discretion. So we have potential new hire, hiring an assistant minister. And I will say already after the board approved that we would move forward with this, one of the board members wanted to interview this person. She was our former intern, so it adds some intrigue to it. And that board member went into this interview, which nobody else thought was really an interview, but he did, and proceeded to ask her if she would stand up to me because he thinks I have too much power. So it was like before she's even hired, he wedged this triangle into, our relationship. So that count as a triangulated relationship?
Yeah, that sounds like one, Lydia.
Yep.
Perfect example. Any other thoughts on or examples that maybe you've run into of a triangulated conversation?
Could I ask folks in West Hills, any examples that you've recently experienced?
Can you hear us okay, James? Because I can't push any buttons or anything.
We can hear you okay. Just speak up loudly.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, they usually abound. Let me think for a minute. Yes, there was a conflict, and we thought, and so we had a meeting of all the people kind of involved. And it was a pleasant meeting, and we thought we worked things through and came to some good conclusions. And then the board president received an email from someone who had not been part of the meeting but had heard from one of the people involved that it had been a very hurtful meeting. And so then the board president needed to come back to me. Well, she forwarded the email and said, did you know about this? So yeah, it was, and so then we worked it out. We met together and whatnot, but initially, yeah, I thought it was pretty classic.
Sounds like a classic example.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, thank you for your ideas, and I'm sure all of us have run into it in one way or another, either in our congregations or in our personal relationships. I'm going to present a little scenario which will give us a way to talk about triangulation. So we're in the Sunny Valley UU congregation, and Jim is a member there who facilitates a covenant group that meets twice monthly on Sunday afternoons in a church classroom. Now, in that classroom, Jim has been the teacher earlier in the day for the third graders. The round tables where Jim's group are to gather are once again messy and sticky when Jim arrives to set up for his covenant group. And once again, John did not wipe those tables off before leaving the classroom. And once again, Jim is stuck cleaning the tables. He's mad, and he's getting madder all the time. He washes off the tables and grumbles to himself. And then his friend Jane just happens by. She's a member of the church board, and she walks past the door and sticks her head in to say hi. And then Jim promptly unloads what he is feeling. Jane, I'm just sick of cleaning up after John's class. It happens all the time. He's irresponsible and messy. Oh, but Jane, don't tell him I said so. I really don't want him mad at me. Jane is quick to reassure. Oh, I see how frustrated you are. You always do such a great work with the covenant group, and I do see that John's behavior is causing a problem for you, but don't worry. I won't say a word to him. So now let's keep in mind this scenario that I just gave. Jim in the classroom, Jane, the board member, stopping by, and John, who is somewhere but not having cleaned the table. And let's take a look at those questions I put out earlier and also bring in your examples you might think from your own experience. First of all, what are triangulated conversations? well, they're a conflict or a disagreement between two people, but then the complainer then talks to a third person. And that talk is usually in a complaining or criticizing kind of way. In other words, in this case, Jim didn't go directly to John. He used Jane as a middle person. And third, the third person, Jane, is asked to keep the comments secret. And with that keeping secret request, the triangle is created. Now, why do we get lured into them? And there may be several reasons for that, but here are some of the main ones. They help us vent feelings. In this case, Jim is upset. He wants someone to know about it. Now, venting may be good for the soul for some people, but it is not very productive if you actually want to bring about change. By talking about the issue with the third person, in this case, it was Jane, Jim introduces the triangle. But we also engage in triangulation just to get something off the chest. You might say, I feel so much better telling you about it. That's what Jim said to Jane. We do it to avoid conflict. Are any of us conflict avoidant? I think maybe we are. Jim certainly is. He says, oh, I don't want to get into an argument with John. But we also do it to gain sympathy and support from our friends. Jim does feel rather righteous when Jane affirms his feelings of frustration and anger. Jane supports him and provides assurance that he's justified in being angry. But how does the triangulation benefit Jane, the listener? Do you have any thoughts on how Jane might benefit from this? And I'll invite you to offer some observations. That third person in a triangle, again, think back to your own experience as well, and how that third person benefits.
I've unmuted everybody, so feel free to chime in.
Okay, Lydia.
Yeah, so Jane gets the power of information, of insider information. So there's a power place for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit of power. Anything else?
It makes Jane feel important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. She's feeling important by gaining information about something, a relationship or a rift in the relationship between two people in the congregation. Anything else? I'll go on to the next slide. And as Lydia pointed out, it certainly gives the person power. And Jane, in this case, receives assurance for being a great listener. I mean, Jim has told her, oh, I so appreciate you being such a good listener and helping me out. Jane also sends a signal that she can be trusted. She can be a trusted friend. It also suggests that others can come to her. And depending upon Jane's particular personality and a desire for information, she might get some good gossip about somebody else in the congregation. So these are real reasons for Jane getting drawn into a triangulated conversation. Well-intentioned people, which I think all of us are, listen to another person's complaints or opinions, and voila, we get drawn into the triangle. And sometimes we might end up taking sides. And it can happen so easily. We can slip into it without even knowing that it's happening. The only way for the triangulation to stop is to have the first person, in this case of the scenario, Jim, to communicate his feelings and concerns directly to the other person, in this case, John, who is at the bottom of the issue here. Now, are there ways we can catch ourselves slipping into the triangulation trap by drawing a third person into the mix? How could we stop ourselves? Let's just have a couple of your ideas. What would you suggest if you find yourself, or you're in the room with somebody else and find that that person is slipping in? Do you have any suggestions? Just we'll unmute and you can just toss something out.
I've found that one of the most successful ways of interrupting that I use when I'm the receiver of the information is to say, to affirm feelings and then ask the question, how can I help you be in direct communication with the person you're frustrated with?
That's great, Barb. Yeah, really. Just stop the complaining and say, how can I help you? It's an excellent response to kind of interrupt the beginning of a complaint or the triangulation. Anything else on the suggestions? That's a really good one.
I also heard Barb say clearly to affirm the feelings.
Yes.
So say, you sound really upset. How can I help you make sure that Joe knows why, whatever that would be,
Right. In other words, it shows, once again, you are a good listener because you've actually affirmed those feelings. You've heard those feelings and affirmed them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. So here are some other ideas how we can recognize ourselves and our part in a triangulated conversation. We can ask ourselves, maybe I feel uncomfortable speaking directly. I'm sure Jim acknowledged it. He said, I don't want to make John angry. So he felt uncomfortable speaking directly. Did he share his complaint with a third person? Yes. And yes, he did ask that his complaint be kept confidential. Perhaps Jim even expects, with that third person sharing the complaint, does he expect Jane to ask the board to solve his problem with John, like issue a formal board request to clear the tables before he leaves the classroom? So there are all sorts of motives that happen. And now what? What about Jane? What can that third person in the triangulated conversation do? How might Jane respond to Jim, the speaker? And what do you think Jane could say? Barb offered the one affirming the feelings and then saying, what would you like me to do? Do you have any other ideas for Jane, the third figure in the triangulation, for her to say? Why don't we unmute, and if you have some ideas for how Jane might respond, just toss those out. Okay, we're all unmuted now.
So Elaine, how about you? Any ideas or thoughts on this?
Well, I think perhaps volunteering even to help the person directly approach the third person there that they have the issue with.
Okay, that's good. I will get to that in a moment. Sure, excellent. Any other ideas?
I usually just start by saying, would you feel comfortable talking to the person about this?
Okay, yes, ask. In other words, ask and encourage the talking to the person directly. Exactly. So that could be a good role for Jane. She is a board member and presumably is a congregational leader. So that might be something that would be very helpful suggestion from her. Any other ideas? One thing that we want to avoid, of course, is the keeping of secrets. I'm going to go to the next slide. One thing that Jane can do, or the third person could say, is ask clarifying questions. Be an active listener and reflect back what you hear. Jane might say, I hear you're frustrated, and then ask specifically, have you shared your concerns with John? And as was suggested, you can offer your presence. Jane can say, it would be really helpful if John knew of your frustration with having to clean the classroom tables before you set up for your covenant group. Would it help if I go with you to talk to him? So offer your own presence as, not as a mediator, but just as a presence. Then if Jim is still reluctant, ask Jim, in this case, Jane can ask Jim's permission to tell the third person or to tell John. Jane might ask, Jim, may I tell John you have a concern about the condition of the classroom? In doing this, these options clarify Jane's position, that you're not a keeper of secret complaints, and that you're aware, that she is aware of the need to, that John needs to know of the concern. It ends in directness with the third person caught in the middle. By talking to each other, we can understand, or in this case, Jim can understand extenuating circumstances around a conflict area. In other words, maybe John had to leave the room before it was completely in order to pick up his preschooler from the church nursery. Then it's also up to the person involved to talk to each other. The two principals, Jim and John, can then work out a plan to eliminate or lessen the conflict or the disagreement. For example, John might say, I'll pick up my daughter, then I'll come back to the classroom with her to finish cleaning the tables. She's only 4 and she loves to help me in the kitchen. So she would probably love to help clean off the tables. And so this is a benefit both to Jim, his classroom is ready, and also lessens the disagreement or the potential conflict with his colleague and fellow Congregationalist, John. But now, what if these suggestions don't work?
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure, Lydia.
Oh, I'm not muted. So one has to do with the difference between secret and confidentiality.
Yes.
The minister's role. Maybe you'll go into these later. And the other one has to do with power differentials.
Yes, exactly.
So if someone feels I can't talk to me because I have more power and standing.
Okay, that's exactly the place where a third person might be helpful. Now, depending upon the mechanism you have within your congregation, in other words, and often in the congregational covenants, there will be a stipulation not only about behavioral covenants between members, but if there's a disagreement with the minister, and a process that could be using the Committee on Ministry, it could be using a mechanism like that. And also, I think it's often helpful if you have a disagreement that perhaps someone might go with you, but the first attempt should be to speak directly to the minister and see if you can sit down and work out the conflict. As we all know, many conflicts that escalate into higher levels of conflict often start with simple disagreements. In other words, a problem to be solved. When you sit down directly, the problem can be worked out. But as I say, it's often helpful within a congregation, particularly in any issues that come up with a minister, to think about that and prepare for it when you're not in conflict with a stipulation in your covenant of right relations or your behavioral covenant, and how those issues are handled. As I say, many congregations use the Committee on Ministry as I'm not going to say the mediator, because they're not a mediator, but as a presence to work with the minister when there is that power differential. It definitely is an issue. That power differential might come within a congregational committee. Let's say you have a long-standing committee chair who's been in that role, maybe even against all good advice, for 5 or 6 years, just has kind of moved into that role. You have a new member, let's say it's a worship committee, and you have a new member join that committee and has some really good ideas for rearranging the potted plants at the front of the sanctuary. And as we all know, those are exactly the kinds of little things that can cause conflicts. So there is a power differential here, a new member of a committee speaking up in the committee meeting against a long-standing committee chair or a long-standing member. So again, that power differential has to be considered. And in a case like that, it might be good to have within the committee meeting a discussion around the placing of the plants and offer opinions of others who may never have thought of such a thing. This is a brand new opinion coming to a member. So those power differentials are definitely important. Okay, any other questions?
Lydia, you brought up secrets.
Secrets versus confidentiality, yeah.
Oh, yes, confidentiality.
So a congregant comes and talks to me about why they left a committee, so.
Yes. Okay, there, and at the, well, no, I didn't include on here, but there's an excellent resource. In fact, if, this is just a little tip, if you go and put into a Google search or something else, secrecy and confidentiality, you find lots of really good information just online.
Right.
Then in some of the reference books at the end of this, which I'm not going to go through all of those, but there are a number of really good references that you can find. You probably have in your church library that will offer some various tips on that. Right. Peter Steinke's books and so on. But there is that definite difference. There are certain things, and that's where there, I think particularly a minister needs to have absolute clarity about what is confidential and what is a secret. If someone comes and says to you, don't tell so-and-so that I said this about her role on the worship committee. I think that's more of a request for secrecy. That's not confidentiality. As a minister, you might want to get the two members together to discuss the problem if it can't be solved in the committee meeting. But that is often a question that comes up. What is the difference between secrecy and confidentiality?
The best resource that I have found on this is a book called The Secret Life of Families. Secret Life of Families,
okay.
And I put that title in the chat box. I'm sorry I don't have the author's name off the top of my head. And it addresses specifically secrets within families, but I find a lot of what the author talks about can very easily be applied to congregations.
Great.
And the author of this book actually talks about not a bright blue line, but a continuum between secrets and confidentiality.
Right.
And
Oh, go ahead, James.
yeah, and a key question that he poses is whose secret is it to tell? Because there are some secrets that story belongs to the person.
I know on our Pacific Northwest District Healthy Congregations team, there are some resources, and I think I have put one up that on there in the past that's there now that directly addresses this issue of confidentiality and secrecy, that defines those areas and traps to avoid in approaching those. And I'm pretty sure that's on the PNWD site. And I think there's a part on there that says Healthy Congregations Resources, and it's on there. So our suggestions to help reduce this triangulated situation, what if they just don't work? And Jane can go back and ask Jim, what exactly are you looking for when you share your complaint? In other words, that was brought up. What would you like from me? Now, Jim may just be venting, and by listening calmly, without adding comments that fuel Jim's feelings of being wrong. After all, Jane did say, I understand how John can be frustrating and so on. But if she doesn't add comments, just listens, Jane becomes a safe, even healing friend who helps Jim let go of the issue. That would be the ideal situation. It helps the person avoid partisanship, helps Jane avoid partisanship. She isn't being recruited to fight another person's war. Jane has offered options to Jim, like going with him and so on, and those that he can use to resolve the issue. But she's not taking the issue on herself. And I think that's a key point. And she also clarifies she is not going to be carrying grievances to the third party. She clarifies that Jim needs to speak directly to John and that she will even offer to go with him to help if he needs some just moral support to do that. And finally, you've avoided secrecy. Now, you remember back in the scenario, Jim asked Jane not to tell John about his complaints. And secrecy is always unhealthy in a community. Responding to anonymous complaints. Now, what about John? How can he respond if Jane slips up and brings Jim's grievances to him without saying where they came from? Okay, what can John say? He can ask Jane, well, how do you feel about this? He can also ask, is Jim's complaint a concern for you two? Has the way I left the classroom, has that affected you as well? John can also ask Jane, would you help us get together? Would you be willing to help? And I would welcome, says John, I would welcome a chance to talk with Jim about it. So these steps then help move toward resolution. By untangling the triangles, the goals we have are to avoid misunderstandings between individuals by speaking directly to the person that the issue concerns. We encourage healthy conversations by refusing to carry a message from one person to another, by offering to meet with both of them together or find someone else who might be able to do that too. And we also reduce venting by first listening, then asking what action the person will take to resolve the problem. And then finally, Jane or anyone can refuse to take anonymous or non-specific feedback seriously to anyone. And very often that's sometimes a policy or a behavioral standard in congregations that anonymous complaints are not encouraged. And finally, we can build healthy congregations, and that is our ultimate goal. I'd said at the beginning, we'd mentioned something about triangulation and if it can be healthy. So this is just one fun suggestion. I think it came from the Reverend Margaret Kipe, who I look upon as a mentor to many of us in terms of healthy congregational and healthy human relationships. So this was a suggestion that came from Marge. So plan secretly to enhance goodwill in your congregation. Tell no one what you're doing. This way you won't have to explain what you're up to or have your efforts sabotaged. Next, think about a member and name some positive qualities about that member. Now, keep all of this very quiet. Now, you may see and hear negative behaviors in that member, but choose not to focus on them. Select one quality and start a rumor. And pass the rumor along. Now, how do you do that? Whenever appropriate, say to another member something like, I like the friendly way Jim always greets visitors on Sunday morning. Or, I appreciate how often John volunteers to help with the RE classes. Or, I really like the way Jane keeps everyone up to date on what the board is working on in her newsletter column. Now, if you do this, if you start this kind of rumor, it has to be heartfelt and sincere. So the point is to emphasize something good. Now, let's say you pass your rumor along to someone and they start to say, well, Jim really is a problem in some ways. Don't comment. After all, you're choosing to give energy to the positive part of this relationship. And finally, pass it along. Everyone has permission to keep spreading truthful rumors. So you water the flowers and not the weeds. You grow healthy congregations. And these kinds of healthy rumors or healthy triangulation is the opposite of gossip. It can enhance relationships and grow a healthy congregation. And here are a few of the resources that I've mentioned, Speed Lee's and so on, that are excellent. They're classics, and certainly you can go to those. These are just a few that I've listed, as well as the PNWD Healthy Congregations resources sites. So do you have any questions or specific situations that you have other than the two that we've heard earlier from your own situation in your congregations?
Carol, let me interrupt for just one moment and say that we'll be sending out copies of the slide after the webinar, so don't feel a need to take notes now. Okay. Yes, I should have mentioned that James will have those posted or be sent out to people who have registered. So are any of the questions? Are there particular issues that you're having that we all might talk about and check in on? Carol, could I suggest that you stop sharing your screen, and that way we can see each other again? Okay, sure.
There we go.
So this is Barb. I have a question that I guess a question that I want to tease out a little bit. In your scenario with the two guys and Jane, you had Jane going to the so you've got forgive me for forgetting their names. You've got the guy who's angry and the guy who's angry.
Jim is angry, Jane's an intermediary, and John is a recipient.
So you've got Jane going to John to share with him what Jane was frustrated about. In my understanding of triangulation, that's the primary problem, is that we end up in indirect communication. And certainly applying that to a congregational setting, I'm an interim. My job is to piss off half the congregation at any given time. And what ends up happening time and time again is that folks in the congregation who are upset come to somebody who's not upset to talk about what I'm doing.
Okay.
And the information comes to me not by the people who are upset. And so I just want to tease out your scenario a little bit to better understand what the benefit is of that indirect conversation.
Okay, that's a good point, Barb, because there's a slight difference here. Jane goes to John and says, Jim has an issue he'd like to discuss with you. And but she doesn't carry all of the complaint. She said, would you like me to, be part, join the two of you or whatever. But she doesn't just carry the complaint. She's saying, there is this issue, the two of you need to get together, and I'd be glad to be there with you. So she's not just carrying the story. Her point is she's making John aware that another member is upset and that she's willing to, help them come together. But she's not just passing the information along. That's a really good point to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, good. Any other questions? How about there in West Hills? Any questions that you might have?
This is something that we've been working hard on for at least the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
I don't know how much progress we've made, but there's a lot more awareness than there used to be.
Yeah, and Sharon, that's really good. I mean, building awareness is key. First of all, how easily some of these conflict issues arise, just how easily they happen. And they begin very innocently. I mean, just complaining. We all complain about things, but it's when we complain to others and then ask them to keep it secret. So, Sharon, one thing that, do you have a Healthy Congregations team in your congregation, or you're the COM group, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much our responsibility.
Okay. And one thing that your COM might do, and there are different ways you can do this. You could, I know in my home congregation, one thing that we did was in our newsletter, whether that's an online or a print newsletter, we'd put just small little blurbs in there about situations, perhaps give a very simple scenario and say how this can cause problems in a, whether it's between people or in a congregation. Right now we're at the holidays, and we've certainly seen enough in the news and on suggestions about how to have non-conflicted conversations around the family holiday table, whether it's about politics or anything else. So you might take a look at some of those, The Secret Life of Families, or some of those other suggestions, the Peter Steinke. Pull out a few, 2 or 3 paragraphs and put that, say, here are some tips from your committee on ministry about how to resolve some of the conflicts that might come up just during this holiday season.
That's a great idea, because we're just starting a project sort of on compassionate communication and conflict resolution.
Oh, good, good. And Sharon, if you email me, I can send you 2 or 3 examples of just brief little newsletter articles that we put in. Now, these were from a few years ago, but there were just little reminders of, here are some tips about how to not necessarily avoid conflict, but how to, when you get into conflict, you can handle it in a healthy way. So as I say, send me an email and I can just drop some of those in. It kind of gives you an idea of some examples that you might use. And of course, you can create your own.
Can you make those available to all of us?
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carol, if you send those to me, when I'll send those out with the slides.
Okay, James.
Great, thank you,
What
James.
I'll do is put them into one document, maybe a page, page and a half. They're fairly short, but then you can send them out. Okay, I'll do that in the morning.
Great, thanks so much.
But so a lot of our job, whether it's the minister or committee on ministry, or if your congregation has a healthy congregations team, is first of all building awareness. And I think also assuring people that the world does not fall apart if there's a conflict and disagreement over how the plants are arranged at the front of the sanctuary. I mean, because those are the things in a congregation that really do escalate. There's some also excellent resources on that on the Pacific Northwest District website about the levels of conflict and how you can recognize as things go from simply a disagreement and a problem to solve, and how they escalate into a larger conflict that is, can be damaging to human relationships and to congregational relationships.
Hey, Carol, I have a question.
Sure.
One thing that I see as a source of conflict within congregations is the blast email.
Yes.
So often, instead of responding directly to a person in person, somebody will send out an email and copy the entire congregation on it.
Yes.
And I was, after listening to you speak, my question for you, would you say this is a form of triangulation?
It's a form of triangulation and demolition in a way. There's nothing more, there's nothing that can possibly be more destructive in a congregation to these email that go out. Sometimes the person inadvertently sends it to everyone. He or she thinks he's actually responding to an individual. It's going to be a private conversation, and neglected to see that he had hit the reply all, and it goes out. I always say when there are disagreements, in other words, a problem to solve, once it gets beyond that, the use of email to communicate should be stopped. And I think in some of those resources, those Pacific Northwest District Healthy Congregations, there are 2 articles on use of email, because that can be particularly corrosive to relationships. Definitely. So that's something else that I think makes a really good topic in a committee on ministry meeting, about the possibility of eliminating email at a certain point when a disagreement comes up, to limit email to the setting of meetings and so on. When you go on to begin discussing emotions and problems, complications arise. I think some of our experts on human communications say that approximately 80% of our communication is done not through words, but through our body language, our facial expressions, and so on. Tone of voice. email does not convey that. How many of us have received an email that had one tone, or we read it as having one tone, but was not the intention of the writer? I know I certainly have, and I think I've sent emails that were taken in that way. So take a look at those resources on email and when to use it and when to stop using it. It can be as I say, a dangerous tool when a conflict arises. And I see it is now 8 o'clock.
Yes, we're nearing the end of our time together. Carol, I found this very useful. It's not new material to me, but it's just it's good for me to hear it over and over and over again, because no matter how many times I hear about triangles, I feel like I'm always tempted to get sucked into them almost on a daily basis, either in family life or work life. So thank you very much. For the rest of you, I hope this was helpful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are always striving towards constant improvement in the quality of the services that your regional staff provides to congregations. So in addition to the slides, I'll be sending out a survey after this webinar. So I strongly encourage you to fill it out. It will help us to just continue to improve the quality of services and programs that we offer.